Get on your knees and beg for forgiveness, or I'll destroy everything you love. My mother-in-law's voice cut through the elegant ballroom like a blade, silencing the string quartet and freezing 200 of Houston's most elite socialites mid-champagne sip. I stood in the center of the dance floor in my $8,000 Valentino gown, my husband's pregnant mistress smirking beside his mother, both of them waiting for me to crumble. What none of them knew was that the manila envelope tucked inside my clutch contained 3 DNA tests, 2 paternity results, and 1 truth so explosive it would bring the entire Kensington dynasty crashing down before dessert was served. My name is Amelia Thornton Kensington, and this is the story of how I destroyed my own marriage to save myself. Let me take you back 5 years, to the night I made the worst decision of my life. I was 26 years old, working as a corporate attorney at a mid-sized firm in downtown Houston. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. I had worked my way through law school on scholarships and sheer determination, graduated top of my class, and landed a job that my single mother in Galveston never dreamed possible for her daughter. Then I met Jonathan Kensington III at a charity gala. The Kensingtons were Texas royalty. Oil money that stretched back 4 generations, a family name that opened every door in the state, and a reputation for philanthropy that masked decades of ruthless business practices. Jonathan was the golden child, the heir apparent, groomed from birth to take over the family empire. He was also devastatingly handsome, impossibly charming, and completely focused on me from the moment we met. "You're the only person at this party who looks as bored as I feel," he said, appearing beside me at the bar. "Let me guess. Lawyer? How did you know? You've checked your watch 3 times in the last 5 minutes, which means you're billing someone by the hour even when you're not working." He smiled, and it felt like the sun coming out. "I'm Jonathan. I know who you are. Then you have me at a disadvantage. And I'd very much like to even the score." We talked for 3 hours that night. He was witty, self-deprecating, and surprisingly down-to-earth for someone worth $500 million. He asked about my childhood, my mother, my dreams. He remembered every detail and referenced them in conversations weeks later. He made me feel seen in a way no one ever had before. 6 months later, he proposed with a 7-carat diamond that had belonged to his great-grandmother. I should have noticed the red flags. His mother, Victoria Kensington, whose face never seemed to move due to decades of cosmetic procedures, had smiled at me during our first meeting with all the warmth of a rattlesnake. His father, Jonathan too, had looked me up and down like a horse at auction, then turned to his son and said, "She'll do, I suppose. Good breeding hips. Good breeding hips." I had laughed it off then, chalking it up to old-fashioned Texas attitudes. I didn't understand that those 3 words would come to define my entire marriage. The wedding was a spectacle. 500 guests, a cathedral draped in white roses, a reception at the family estate that cost more than my mother's house. I walked down the aisle feeling like a princess, completely blind to the fact that I was walking into a gilded cage. The pressure started on our honeymoon. "Mother wants to know if you're tracking your cycle," Jonathan said casually on our 3rd night in Bora Bora, as if discussing the weather. "Excuse me? Your cycle? For fertility purposes. She's already consulted with a specialist. Apparently, the first year of marriage is optimal for conception." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. "Jonathan, we haven't even unpacked our wedding gifts. Can we enjoy being married before we start planning a family?" Something flickered across his face. Annoyance, maybe. Or disappointment. "Of course, darling. I'm just passing along the message." That was the first crack in the fairy tale. Over the next 3 years, I learned what it truly meant to be a Kensington wife. My job was to look beautiful, attend charity events, manage the household staff, and above all, produce an heir. My career was gently but firmly discouraged. "You don't need to work, darling. Let me take care of you." I gave up my law practice after year 1. Victoria had made it clear that a working wife reflected poorly on the family's image. I gave up my friends after year 2. They didn't fit into the Kensington social circle, and finding time to maintain outside relationships became impossible with the endless schedule of luncheons, galas, and family obligations. I gave up myself somewhere in year 3. I stopped recognizing the woman in the mirror, all designer clothes and perfect hair and empty eyes. But the one thing I couldn't give them was a baby. We tried everything. Fertility specialists, hormone treatments, IVF cycles that left my body bloated and my spirit broken. Each negative test was a personal failure, announced by Victoria with barely concealed contempt. "Perhaps," she said one evening at dinner, "the problem isn't medical. Perhaps it's genetic. Some bloodlines simply aren't meant to continue." Some bloodlines. She meant mine. The poor girl from Galveston with no pedigree, no legacy, no worth beyond her functioning uterus, which apparently wasn't functioning at all. What I didn't know then was that Jonathan had already found a solution to their problem. Her name was Brittany Collins. I discovered the affair the way most wives do, through carelessness and cliché. A receipt for jewelry I never received. A hotel charge on a credit card he forgot I could access. Lipstick on a collar that wasn't my shade. When I confronted him, Jonathan didn't even bother to deny it. "You can't give me what I need, Amelia," he said with a shrug, as if discussing a business transaction. "Brittany can. She's already pregnant." The floor dropped out from under me. Pregnant? 12 weeks. The doctor confirmed it's a boy. He smiled, actually smiled, like he was sharing good news. Mother is thrilled. She's already planning the nursery. Your mother knows? Of course. This was her idea. I sat down heavily, my mind struggling to process the betrayal. Not just my husband. His mother. His father. The entire family had conspired to replace me with a woman who could do the one thing I couldn't. What about us? I whispered. What about our marriage? Jonathan sighed, looking at me with something close to pity. The marriage will continue, of course. Appearances matter. But Brittany will be moving into the guest house. Once the baby is born, we'll figure out a more permanent arrangement. A permanent arrangement. Divorce is messy. Bad for business. But we can come to an understanding, can't we? You keep the title, the lifestyle, the social standing. Brittany gets the rest. I should have screamed. I should have thrown things. I should have walked out that door and never looked back. Instead, I nodded, numb, and said, "I need some time to think." That night, I started planning. I wasn't going to leave the Kensington family with nothing. I had given them 5 years of my life, my career, my identity. If they wanted to discard me like defective merchandise, they were going to pay for it. I hired a private investigator. His name was Frank Delgado, a former Houston PD detective who had seen enough wealthy families to know where the bodies were buried. I gave him one instruction: find out everything about Brittany Collins and anything else the Kensingtons were hiding. "You sure about this?" Frank asked me during our first meeting, in a diner far from the Kensington social orbit. "Once you start digging into people like this, there's no going back. You might find things you don't want to know." "I've spent 5 years not knowing things," I replied. "I think it's time I started." Frank nodded slowly, a glimmer of respect in his tired eyes. "All right then. But I warn you, in my experience, families like the Kensingtons always have more skeletons than closets to put them in." He wasn't wrong. Over the next 6 weeks, Frank delivered report after report, each one more damning than the last. The Kensington family fortune, it turned out, wasn't quite as solid as they pretended. Years of bad investments in Jonathan II's gambling habit had eroded nearly 40% of their wealth. The charity foundation was partially a tax shelter. And Victoria's social dominance was maintained through a network of blackmail and strategic secrets she had collected over 3 decades. But all of that paled compared to what Frank uncovered about Brittany Collins. What he found was beyond my wildest imagination. Brittany Collins, it turned out, wasn't just Jonathan's mistress. She had a history, a pattern. Over the past 7 years, she had been involved with 3 other wealthy married men, each relationship ending with a pregnancy and a substantial settlement. She was a professional, and the Kensingtons had hired her like a contractor. But that wasn't the bombshell. Frank had managed to obtain a copy of the prenatal genetic testing Brittany had done at 8 weeks. The Kensingtons had ordered it to confirm the baby's sex, wanting to ensure they were getting their precious male heir. The test results included something they hadn't anticipated: a genetic marker analysis. The baby wasn't Jonathan's. The biological father, according to the DNA profile, was a match for someone else in the Kensington household. Someone whose genetic information was on file due to a medical procedure 3 years ago. Jonathan Kensington II. My father-in-law. I read the report 5 times, convinced I was misunderstanding. But the science was clear. Brittany had been sleeping with both Jonathan and his father, and the baby she was carrying, the heir that would supposedly save the Kensington dynasty, belonged to the patriarch, not the son. I sat in my car outside Frank's office, laughing until I cried. The dynasty they were so desperate to continue was about to implode from within. The heir they had schemed and betrayed to obtain was actually Jonathan's half-sibling. And the woman they had brought in to replace me had played them all. I could have exposed everything immediately. But I waited. I needed the perfect moment, the maximum impact, the kind of public humiliation that would ensure the Kensingtons could never recover their precious reputation. That moment came 2 months later, at the annual Kensington Foundation Charity Gala. The event was held at the family estate, a sprawling mansion that looked like it had been transplanted from a southern plantation. 200 guests, all of Houston's elite, gathered to celebrate the family's generosity while secretly gossiping about their dysfunction. I had been dreading the evening. Victoria had been increasingly hostile since Brittany's pregnancy became public knowledge, and I knew something was coming. I just didn't know what. I found out at 9 p.m., right after the main course. Victoria stood up and clinked her champagne glass, calling for attention. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," she began, her voice dripping with false warmth. "As you know, the Kensington family has always valued tradition, legacy, and the continuation of our bloodline." My stomach dropped. Unfortunately, not everyone who enters our family understands the weight of these responsibilities. She turned to look at me, and every eye in the room followed. "My daughter-in-law, Amelia, has been with us for 5 years. And in that time, she has failed to fulfill the most basic duty of a Kensington wife." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I felt my face burning. "However, we are fortunate that God has provided another path. Brittany Collins, who carries my grandchild, has shown us that fertility is not our family's problem. The problem lies elsewhere." Brittany stood up, her hand resting on her visible baby bump, wearing a smug expression that made me want to scream. "Therefore," Victoria continued, "I believe it is only appropriate that Amelia acknowledge her failure publicly. She should apologize to this family, to Brittany, and to the child who will carry on our legacy, for the disappointment she has caused." Jonathan appeared beside me, his hand gripping my elbow. "Kneel," he hissed. "Just do it and this will be over." "Kneel? Mother wants you to kneel and apologize. It's symbolic. Just play along." I looked around the room. 200 faces stared back at me, some pitying, some gleeful, all waiting to witness my humiliation. And something inside me went very, very calm. "You want me to kneel?" I said, loud enough for the room to hear. Victoria smiled triumphantly. "It's the least you can do, dear. After everything we've given you." I sank to my knees on the cold marble floor. The room held its breath. Then I looked up at Victoria, at Jonathan, at Brittany with her smug smile and her baby bump, and I laughed. "You're right," I said, reaching into my clutch. "I do owe this family an apology. I apologize for not realizing sooner what kind of people you really are." I stood up, holding the manila envelope. "I apologize for not knowing that my husband's mistress has run this exact scam on 3 other families, walking away with over $4 million in settlements for babies she claimed were theirs." The murmuring grew louder. "I apologize for not understanding that the Kensington legacy is so important that you would hire a professional con artist to produce an heir, rather than accept that maybe, just maybe, the fertility problem wasn't mine at all." Jonathan's face had gone pale. "Amelia, what are you?" "But most of all," I continued, pulling the papers from the envelope, "I apologize for not realizing that the baby Brittany is carrying isn't yours, Jonathan." Dead silence. "It's your father's." The room erupted. I held up the genetic testing results, the paternity analysis, the cold, clinical proof that Jonathan Kensington II had been sleeping with his son's mistress and had fathered the child they were all celebrating. Victoria screamed. Actually screamed, a sound I didn't know she was capable of making. Jonathan turned to his father, who had gone gray, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Dad? Is this true?" Jonathan too couldn't speak. His silence was answer enough. Brittany, realizing her scheme had collapsed, tried to run. She made it 3 steps before 2 of the guests, women who had been victims of similar scams and recognized her pattern from the documents I had strategically leaked earlier that day, blocked her path. "You took $800,000 from my brother," one of them said coldly. "You're not going anywhere. And you told my cousin the baby was his," the other added, her voice shaking with rage. "He paid you off and then killed himself 6 months later from the shame. You remember that, don't you?" Brittany's face had gone white. The confident smirk was gone, replaced by the desperate calculation of a trapped animal. She looked to Jonathan for help, then to his father, but both men were too consumed by their own disaster to notice her. Security guards, unsure of what to do, stood frozen at the edges of the room. This wasn't in their training manual. I walked to the center of the room, my heels clicking on the marble, every eye following me. I came into this family with nothing but love and good intentions. I gave up my career, my friends, my identity, all to be worthy of the Kensington name. And how did you repay me? By treating me like a broodmare. By blaming me for a fertility issue that, according to my doctor, was actually caused by Jonathan's low sperm count, a fact your family has been hiding for years. Gasps from the crowd. Jonathan looked like he wanted to disappear. "You wanted me to kneel? To apologize? Here's my apology. I'm sorry I didn't see through you sooner. I'm sorry I wasted 5 years trying to earn the approval of people who were never going to give it. And I'm sorry for all the other women you've treated this way, the ones who came before me, the ones who will come after." I turned to Victoria, who was clutching her chest, her face a mask of horror. "Your dynasty ends tonight, Victoria. Not because I couldn't give you an heir, but because your husband couldn't keep his hands off your son's mistress. That's your legacy now. That's what people will remember." I dropped the envelope on the floor at her feet. "Consider this my resignation from the Kensington family. My lawyers will be in touch about the divorce. I expect it to be very, very generous." I walked out of the ballroom, past the stunned guests, past the servers frozen with trays in their hands, past the string quartet who had stopped playing mid-note. Behind me, I heard the chaos continuing. Shouts, accusations, the sound of a glass breaking. Jonathan screaming at his father. Victoria wailing about the family name. Brittany threatening to sue everyone in sight. I didn't look back. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. The proceedings were brutal, despite the Kensingtons' desperation to keep things quiet. Jonathan tried to claim I had orchestrated the entire scandal, that I had somehow manipulated the DNA results, that I was the villain in this story. His lawyers painted me as a gold digger, a schemer, a woman scorned. My lawyers painted him as exactly what he was, a weak man who had conspired with his family to humiliate and discard his wife, only to discover that his own father had betrayed him in the most fundamental way possible. The judge, a no-nonsense woman who had seen her share of wealthy families imploding in her courtroom, was not impressed by the Kensington name. In 30 years on the bench, she said during the final hearing, I have never seen a family treat a spouse with such calculated cruelty. Mrs. Thornton Kensington entered this marriage in good faith. She was systematically devalued, blamed for medical issues beyond her control, and ultimately subjected to public humiliation designed to break her spirit. The court finds in her favor on all counts. The Kensington family, desperate to avoid further public humiliation, agreed to a settlement that made me wealthy beyond my wildest dreams. $15 million, the brownstone in River Oaks, and a confidentiality clause that I promptly violated by selling my story to a journalist friend who had been dying to expose the family for years. The article ran in Texas Monthly 3 months later. It was their most read story of the year. Jonathan Kensington too filed for divorce from Victoria 6 weeks after the gala. She fought it viciously, but the prenup she had insisted on decades ago ended up working against her. She got the Connecticut estate and a monthly allowance. He got everything else. Brittany Collins was arrested on fraud charges in 3 states. The families she had scammed came forward one by one, and the evidence was overwhelming. Last I heard, she was serving 4 years in a minimum security prison. Her baby, Jonathan II's biological child, raised by distant relatives who wanted nothing to do with the Kensington name. Jonathan III, stripped of his inheritance after his father's disgrace, tried to rebuild his reputation. He remarried a year later, a sweet young woman from a good family who had no idea what she was getting into. I sent her a card with my lawyer's number. Just in case. As for me, I moved back to Galveston. I bought a little house on the beach, not far from where I grew up. I see my mother every Sunday for dinner. I started practicing law again, this time specializing in helping women escape toxic marriages and prenuptial traps. Last month, I got a letter. It was from Victoria, written in her perfect, spidery handwriting. You destroyed everything, she wrote. Our family, our reputation, our legacy. I hope you're satisfied. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer with the others. She writes every few months, always the same accusations, the same refusal to accept responsibility. I never respond. There's nothing left to say. Sometimes I wonder if she understands, even now, what really destroyed her family. It wasn't me. It wasn't the scandal. It was the rot that had been growing inside the Kensington dynasty for generations, the belief that they were above consequences, that their name protected them from the rules that governed ordinary people. I just held up a mirror. They destroyed themselves. My grandmother used to tell me that the truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. You just have to let it loose, and it will defend itself. I let the truth loose in a ballroom full of people who had spent their lives believing lies. And it didn't just defend itself. It devoured them whole. Some nights, I sit on my porch and watch the waves roll in, and I think about the woman I used to be. The woman who knelt on cold marble floors, who apologized for existing, who believed that her worth was measured by her womb. That woman is gone. In her place is someone stronger, someone fiercer, someone who knows that the only person she ever needed to be worthy of was herself. Last week, a young woman came to my office. She was 28, married to the son of a wealthy Dallas family, and she had the same haunted look in her eyes that I used to see in my own mirror. Her in-laws had been pressuring her about children. Her husband had started making comments. She had found receipts for jewelry she never received. I don't know what to do, she whispered. I love him, but I'm starting to feel like I'm disappearing. I poured her a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. Let me tell you a story, I said. It's about a woman who disappeared into a family that didn't deserve her, and how she found her way back. She listened. And when I was finished, she sat up a little straighter, her eyes a little clearer. What do I do first? She asked. First, I said, you stop apologizing for things that aren't your fault. And then, you start planning. She smiled, the first real smile I had seen from her. Will you help me? That's what I'm here for. They wanted me to kneel. I stood up instead. And I have been standing ever since, helping other women find the strength to stand with me. Because the best revenge isn't just success. It's using that success to make sure no one else has to kneel in the first place.